So, hi everyone, I'm Joe of various things, but today I'll speak in my kind of UAM UCL kind of role, or my old role anyway. So, it's a little bit cheesy, but let's start with a quick bit of like audience participation. So, hands up if you've ever been told that what you're doing is crazy, or what you're trying to change is unchangeable, or just completely unfeasible. Quick hands up. Oh, excellent, you're all dreamers. Great. So I know we have. I'm from a group called Universities Allied for Essential Medicines, which is a member of the Medsin Network, a Medsin activity. So UAM UCL is all about, well, UAM, which is the abbreviation, is all about increasing access to medicines in the developing world. And we propose to do it by changing the drug industry and how it works. So, oh yeah, slides. So, that's too soon.
First time it's happened.
But yeah. So, as you'll no doubt hear at this conference, the pharmaceutical industry is one of the biggest in the world. It's one of the very most powerful, the most influential, and so when people say that we're so when we say we're going to change it, people call us crazy, and they say what we're doing is unfeasible and that it'll never happen, and why we're wasting our time. So I'm going to try and tell you a story about how we prove them all wrong. So 3 years ago, I joined UAM at UCL. And I slowly learned that there was a huge access to medicines problem. As a pharmacologist who was wanting to, one day invent a drug, this was kind of really, really frustrating to me. But I learned that there was a solution and something that we could do as students. My teacher, Beth Sampson at the university, who'd been running the group for 2 years at that university, taught me about things like generic production, which allows basically the price of medicines to be decreased by merely through competition. And universities have a huge role to play in making sure that the technologies that come out of those institutions and universities can be made generically when the price is too high. So together, me and Beth, who were the two members of the society at the time, made a goal. It was a little bit crazy, but we kind of thought that it would be quite fitting that by the time that we both left the university, which was 3 years in the future when we made it, we wanted to have a policy at UCL which would allow things like generic production on all of the medical technologies that come out of the university. And that's everything from drugs to kind of diagnostic techniques, kind of everything that can have an impact on health. So our first challenge on this journey was basically to get some more people involved. There was only 2 of us, and no matter how hard you work, that is sometimes not enough people. But the issue we were trying to get people involved in was notoriously complex, and sometimes quite dull. Intellectual property is very difficult to deal with, and that's the kind of area which we had to work in. To get people involved, we ended up doing a ton of short talks over the first few weeks of term, just me and Beth. Sometimes no one turned up, and it looked like this. And it was really, it was one of those kind of challenging moments where you have to wonder like, if what you're doing is ever going to succeed. And when this happens 2 or 3 times, you really have to question it. But we pushed on. And the people who did turn up to these talks, we managed to engage with them in like a really personal way and really explain the issue in a way which meant something to them. And the people who turned up did join. A very small group started to appear. And slowly, like together we learned about the issues and kind of decided how we wanted to focus on them and how we wanted to campaign on them at UCL. We decided that the way to go was a really highly focused, high-level campaign, focusing all our efforts on just the really important people at the university who could actually change the decision. But the problem was that no one would listen to us. There was very little support for us in the institution and very little awareness of the issue. And we have very little grassroots support to back us up as well. So to tackle this, we kind of got a little bit inventive. Our medicine branch had a magazine, and we decided to focus an issue on our work. And what this essentially meant was that we could blag our way into the offices of almost anyone by saying we wanted to interview them, which basically meant that we can just go and talk to them about what we wanted to talk to them about. But they loved the idea. All of a sudden it was an interview, and they were like, yes, you'll publish it and we'll look good. In reality, we didn't really mind too much about the interview. It was a nice kind of aside, but it got us into the rooms of the people who mattered. And there we made friends, we also made some enemies, but largely we got some support. So we did this for about a year, and we had a lot of meetings with a lot of different people, and kind of worked our way around the institution. So it took about a year, but eventually we made enough noise that the people who actually had the power to change the policy that we needed to allow generic production of medicines when the price was too high, they contacted us, which was just like mind-blowing. We tried for like 2 years before, Beth had anyway, to try and get in contact with them, and they just blankly ignored us. So when they contacted us, like we were pretty happy. We were like, yes, this is showing all the work we've done in raising awareness, and suddenly, they're speaking to us. But it actually got better. We were invited to a meeting, and they told us that they had essentially they created a policy to do what we wanted them to do, essentially. However, there was bad news. The policy was completely secret. We couldn't tell anyone about it. They couldn't tell anyone about it. And to kind of top it all off, they couldn't use it. They hadn't used it. And they really had no ability to use it. Because it wasn't public and they'd had no support from the university on it, it meant that whenever they were negotiating contracts with people, everyone could just be like, no, we don't want this, and they had to throw it out. So very, very quickly, we knew we had to kind of change where our campaign was focused. So we needed to make this policy public, and we needed to make sure that the university backed the technology transfer office so that they could actually use this in negotiations and had a bit of power, so it could make it into real policy. Again, though, we encountered like really big problems. UCL is horribly untransparent, very bureaucratic, and complex. And it took a long time just to figure out who on earth was responsible for making the decisions that we needed to make them. It works. We spent a lot of time just trying to figure that out. During this time, though, we did get support from the union to kind of give us a little bit more kind of teeth in negotiations. And we also sent many of the articles which we'd written to the people at the uni who we thought had the power to make the decision. So that kind of showed them that we were watching and we were coming for them. We also managed to get the current policy that the Technology Transfer Office had, which was private. We managed to make it public. So people could at least know that they had it, but they still had no power to use it. It's written in a really technical language that no one understands, and it was completely useless on its own. So it eventually turned out that the people who could support this policy and make it usable were, of course, the most powerful people in the university. And to reach them and speak to them, we had to go through the business department of the university, who really were not very friendly to us ever, and really still aren't. But we did manage to arrange several meetings with them. They shunned us off a lot, but we managed to we got in the room eventually, and after several meetings, they announced midway through what happened to be our final meeting with them that we had one shot to make our ask with them. And they hadn't told us before that this was our one chance to make a 4-year-long campaign, kind of finish. And so there was, me and the other person in the room, Alon, quickly kind of debated what we had to do and made the ask. And then we left, and summer came. So summer came, months passed, and the leaders of the university changed. We heard absolutely nothing from them, despite asking. We were kept pretty much in the dark. So as term started, the new university leader, who happens to be from Leeds, stood up and said that they were strengthening their policies on intellectual property and how they used all of the kind of patents that come out of the university. And during that same week, we finally heard news that we would hear back kind of imminently about this new policy. And basically, these two things happening at once were basically the complete opposite of what we wanted. And we thought that we'd basically just been screwed over for 3 months and been systematically lied to, which made us really, really angry. So we assumed the worst and we started to prepare for it. We wrote press releases and we used some friends in high places who were kind of on our side to try and get some information that was being hidden from us. And then one day, I'm going to remember it for probably a long time, we were emailed news. It was literally 2 lines, but it linked to a news story on the website, which is it's a little bit pixelated here, actually. But it turns out that they'd done the opposite of what they were saying. And suddenly they had a public policy which endorsed their ability to use generic production in their technologies. So we suddenly found ourselves in a position quite the opposite to where we thought. We were in a position where UCL was now the most progressive university in the EU for this. And the policy is actually really quite good in a lot of ways. So we were really super happy. We had essentially won. The 5 years' work had finally come to the kind of end point. But policy is just words on paper. So I guess it's important to think about what the impact of it is. And there are, I guess, 2 different sides to the impact of this policy. One is the impact it's going to have at UCL and what comes out of UCL in terms of medical technologies. This can only really affect things on the scale of how quickly drug development works, and that's quite a long time. So in a lot of ways, we won't see the results from this policy in terms of lowering the price of medicines for actually quite a long time. But we have recently been told that they were able to incorporate a clause for making sure that if the price of a drug is too high, that they can start to use generic production to lower the cost, right? And they said that essentially that was completely down to the work we had done and getting this policy in place and all the work over the past 5 years. So that's kind of the policy that's kind of one side of things. But there's a whole nother side. So we hope, and as David mentioned earlier, institutions really look at what other institutions are doing. And UCL is one of the biggest research universities in the European Union, and in the UK. I guess if you're big in the EU, big in the UK. It's one of the biggest places in the world to do research. And them having made this policy means it's now much more likely that other universities will be able to do that, both in the EU and the UK. And if that happens, and that could happen relatively quickly, there are chapters all over the world who have managed to incorporate policies like this into their universities. You can see in the US, most of those blue dots actually have policies just like this and that are just as strong. And in a world where a third or a quarter of medicines originate from universities, that creates an environment where a good proportion of the drugs that come out of the drug industry will have these clauses built into them. And that means that possibly the next generation of medicines will be able to be made much cheaper through generic production if the price is too high in low and middle income countries. And so when I said I'd tell you the story of changing an industry, I really only told you one tiny part, the bit at UCL. Like there's 50 other stories like this one from all across the world. But with the power of networks, we've managed to turn like our little story into something which can have a huge, potentially global impact and save, I don't even know how many millions of people. So on that note, I'll end and just try and thank the people who were involved.